All right, welcome back. We are COMP123 in the summer 2020 semester, and it's week 12, part 1 of our broadcast, and we're going to be talking about more data and the entity framework in a bit. But first I wanted to talk about our schedule, like I was just asked about. So if we look at our schedule that's left over for what we have, we're sitting at the second last week of class. So just to give us an idea of where we're at right now in terms of our production, typically week 14 is, because we have normally 14 weeks of class, is where we have our final test. Just a reminder that our final test will be held next week, throughout the week next week. All right, that's what's happening. What I'm going to be doing with the final test is I'm going to make it so that it is you're not going to do it in class. You're going to do it throughout the week. I'm going to release the test early. My thoughts are on Monday I'll release the test. It'll be a practical test that you'll be doing individually again, and you'll have the week to do it. Okay, it'll be a single week. Again, the test will be geared so that way you could have done it in a 2-hour period. It's not made for you to work on for a week. It won't be that long, so it'll be more like a challenge than a an assignment. Now, just keep in mind in terms of our weighting, even though it's only worth it's going to be short. The test weight starting next week is 25 points, 25% of your final grade. That's the test weight. It will cover everything from the second half of semester. That means that I will give you exercises all around stuff that we did past week 4. All right. So remember, we got together after Professor Narendra. So anything past week 4, things we've covered from a object-oriented design perspective. That means inheritance, polymorphism, classes, objects, all that kind of stuff. In the second half of semester, as long as you've had me, it'll cover all those things for the most part, as well as user interface stuff. Now, what I'm probably going to do, just to let you know, is you're going to get an assignment that has something to do with Windows Forms, because we've been working on Windows Forms. I don't want to take you back to console applications. So that's what you're going to get. It's going to be an in-class or in-week assignment that you're going to get. You're going to get it pretty much at the beginning of next week, and you'll have until the end of next week to get it done. So you'll have a whole week to get it done. Typically, we run it within the day. I'm not going to do it in day. I want to give you guys some time, and you can schedule yourself to get it done anytime between Monday and Friday at midnight. What I'm not going to allow is anything past Friday. So if you can't get your assignment done past Friday at midnight, then you get 0. And the reason for this is because it's like a test, right? So there will be no extensions. None of that stuff's going to happen. You'll have the entire week to get it done. I will release it early, and my recommendation is as soon as I release it, you jump on it and finish it. Okay, so that's what's going to happen with next week. So next week, typically I would have classes on Monday, and I would have classes on Wednesday. Next week we'll not have formal lectures, so there's not going to be a lecture next week on Monday or on Wednesday. We're not going to have lectures on Monday or Wednesday. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get together with people to do, it'll be a drop-in kind of office hours where you need to meet with me for feedback and that kind of stuff. I will be providing all your marks next week, so I want to make sure that you guys are around. So I want to make sure that everything is up, and if I have questions for you, let's use or if you have questions for me, let's use the meeting time together on Mondays. That means Monday at 10:30 and Wednesday at 10:30 to get together and give you guys feedback on your assignments. Any kind of help with your test, I will be available for your test on Monday and Wednesday, but there will be no formal lecture. Okay, so I'm gonna open up the Zoom call, but it would just be for us to get together for technical help or feedback. That's it. I'm not going to go into new material. So this is the last week of material, today and on Wednesday, and then next week is the final week of class. Okay, got it? Anyone have any questions or concerns about that? Just want to make sure we address all those before we go on. Okay, if you have a concern, please put up your hand, or if you have a question, because I'm going to move on. So that's the schedule that we're left with for next week, and I wanted to kind of put it up there for you guys this way, so that way it gives you some leeway. I don't want to overload you more than I've already overloaded you with things, and I want to make it so that your next week your time frame is going to be a little bit free. I want to give you guys the time to do your assignments. And I also want you guys to have time to handle all the rest of your work that you're working on right now. I know there's a lot of load, and usually at the last week of class there's a ton of load, and I don't want to be adding to your load. I want to remove your load. So that's why I'm giving you kind of this time back. I'm going to be physically here, so the same time that we're broadcasting at 10:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays. Still open the session. We'll still get together. I'll still answer help, but there won't be a recorded session necessarily. It'll just be me and whatever student shows up. I'm going to go through your work and give you feedback as much as I can. Okay, that's the plan for next week. Okay. So that's what we're doing next week, and then it's done. Your summer semester is done. I know it's going to be probably the first full online semester you all have had. And of course your feedback is appreciated. So I know that the online surveys are out right now, and I think it's a good idea for you guys to give feedback, positive and negative. And I think it's what you want to do. Any feedback you give is good, because then we can improve. So that way we can make kind of your online experience as best as possible. Typically I don't really ask for feedback. I know that you're going to give it if you feel like it, but I think it's a good idea for this semester to kind of, respond and say, hey, here's what worked really well, here's what didn't work so well. I'd like to see these kind of things, and because I'd like to try and make sure as we go forward, if I have you as students again, and I really hope I do, that we can make improvements, right? I want to make it so that your experience is good and that their learning is good, which is the most important part. Things that you're going to take away into the workplace, even whether things normalize somewhat out of our pandemic or not, right? I think this is something that when I'm hearing, when I read things like The Economist, or I look at the news, the projections are for developed countries that probably into 2021, we're going to continue with something like this to some degree until the end of next year, before everything is kind of more normalized. And I think I want to put normalized in air quotes here, because who knows if it's going to really be normalized. Okay, so that's, I want you to be able to take away some of these skills. And the things we've talked about this semester, I think they're key concepts that you're going to be taking into any other programming language. So make sure that you prepare yourself for the final. So from a review perspective, there won't be a formal review next week. Again, I mean, really, your assignment will speak for itself. It literally will be a UI assignment, a small UI assignment that you'll have to create. Again, it's going to be geared for 2 hours. I'm going to repeat myself again one more time, so that way it won't be as intense, let's say, as a regular take-home assignment that you have a couple of weeks to do. Right, and it should be something that's doable if you've been following along within the week. Not a problem. It shouldn't be a difficult thing or something that's going to stress you out. That's not the intent. Okay, it's really just evaluating, do you know how to do the stuff we've talked about in class over the last part of the semester. One thing that there will be, I have to also mention that every assignment so far, I've asked you guys for a video demo, and I really do appreciate the people that have handed those in. And the care that you've taken to give me those. Please, again, continue to make it so that I can hear you and see your screen. That's really important. Some people's stuff that I've looked at, not so great in terms of hearing and seeing, and that's going to make it more difficult for me to mark. So please, for your final tests, make sure that you, in your video, because there will be a video component, that you take your time and demonstrate your work and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for for next week. It's going to come out, and again, I'll go through the details of the assignment when it does come out on Monday, chances are. I'm thinking it'll be Monday when I release it, but like I said, you'll have all week to get it done. Any questions around assignment 5, which is due the last week of class? That means it'll be due next week on Friday, or your final test, which is going to be also due next week on Friday. I'm just looking for any kind of questions. Please put up your hand, and then I'll move on if we don't have questions. All right, looks like you guys are good. So what I'm going to do today, starting off, is I'm going to continue with some of the things we talked about last day. So last day we were working with an assignment or a project that looked like this. I'm just going to run it. Let me just rename this thing. So I'm going to rename this project week lesson 12. It was I'm coming off of lesson 11, so that is something that I can change. You can change this in your project. In project, you can change some of the stuff. You can rename almost anything, almost. So if I try to rename a lesson 11 DB dataset to lesson 12 DB dataset as an example, it's going to ask you to do a renaming everywhere, and it says it could not be refactored because the current object is auto-generated, only supports renaming through the dataset designer. Do you wish to continue refactoring? And the answer is yes. I'm going to try. Okay. But the thing is, with this dataset designer, and if I bring up the dataset designer, what I may have caused, if you ever try and do this kind of stuff, notice there's a lot of stuff in the back end from a dataset perspective. Be careful when you do this, because what may happen is you might have a disconnection now. Okay, so I'm just putting it up there. If you're trying to rename everything like I just did, bad things can occur. In your app.config, where it says your my connection string is the way it is, this also is, notice it says less than 11 dB. We're going to have to recreate this connection string in a second, as you'll see. So if I was to run this thing now, last time it would run and you got this, and it looks like we're good to go. If I go open a file like we did last time, I can open up the contact list. This is where we left off. I can see here that I got access to my file, and that pretty much covers a lot of the stuff that you'll need for your assignment number 5. I talked about file loading and saving in assignment 5 and a bunch of other stuff. So today what I want to talk about is something different. So we're talking about something called the entity framework. So far what we've been doing is we've been connecting to our database old school. This is using a data set, which is part of our project. And what the entity framework is something that you're going to be learning about, or you would have learned about in if we were doing COMP123 the old way. COMP123, when we first did it, this is another course we're talking about now, normally held in the 3rd semester, would be connecting to something like web forms or ASP.NET. And ASP.NET, as well as Windows Forms, which is what you're doing here, have a common back end. And a lot of times what we want to do is we want to support something called a model view controller kind of a design pattern. But here, the entity framework is a wrapper, that's what it does, or a mapper that wraps around our database and helps us create the model for our data, okay, a little differently than what we have right now. It supersedes the data set paradigm that we've been using here in our assignment, the stuff that we're doing. I don't expect you guys to use this for assignment number 5 in any way. What I'm thinking instead is I just wanted to show you this and kind of go over it with you so you understand what it is, because it's a popular thing that's being used right now in ASP.NET or any .NET framework. Okay. So what are the benefits? This object relational mapper has been used to make it easier for you to model databases, because a lot of times what we need when we split up things into so here's our database. Typically what we use is ADO.NET, which is what we're doing right now. We're kind of connecting with a direct connection to the database. And what an entity framework does, it's an abstraction. It's just another layer outside of the database layer. And what it does is allows us to create classes that we can connect with or that are directly related to the tables that are inside the database. So a good example of that is we've made so far a contact table in our database, right? Remember last week what we did as a review in our SQL Server Object Explorer, right? We had a local DB. This is our local DB here. And inside of our local DB, in MS SQL local DB, we created a database called less than 11 database. That's what we called it last week. Inside the database, we created a table, which is dbo.contacts, right? So this is the contacts table. And if I look at the table, you can actually view the data on the table like we did before. This is the data that we put in the table in our dbo.contacts table. But the way we're connecting to it is not through any kind of model or class. There isn't a one-to-one relationship. We have something called a contact class that's kind of our model or schema for what the table is going to look like. But what we've been doing is we first load the table into a data grid view and then we connect to it in our contact class. That's kind of a disconnection, if you will, right, between the contact class and the table, right? What our entity framework allows us to do is it actually allows us to make a direct connection and whatever we model in our contact class, which will be our model for our database, it'll be a direct connection. So in other words, first name, last name, email address, and contact number, which is in our table, it would be mapped here in our contact, just like how it is here. Instead of us doing it manually like the way we've done it, our database itself will create the code. Let me talk about how this works. So there's a few approaches to creating this entity data model that we're talking about. So there is a database first approach, a code first approach, a model first approach, or a code first data from database approach. There's different approaches. So we'll talk about each of them in brief, okay? So the database first approach is usually when we have an existing database. And most of the times, guys, when you work in the real world, you'll have a database, that's already in existence. You'll have a database, and that database is something that you may not have access to modify at all. You can't modify the structure. You can't modify anything. That's normally how it is, but you can tap into it and get the data from it. So typically what we want to do is we want to do a one-to-one mapping of all the database tables with some kind of schema. We want to take the database and create the code. That's how database first approach works. Code first approach is where you don't have a database and you're thinking about I want to create a mechanism for persisting data, and I have a class. For example, I have something like my contact class, and I want to make a database table from my contact class, not the other way around. So first I make my code, and then my code creates my table. All right, that's how it works. And it happens automatically, by the way, or automagically, the way you want to think about it. Okay, so that's the code first approach. And then there's the model first approach. So what you can use is you can create the model by some visual tools where you can actually draw or design your database almost in a UML diagram layout, just like we did with our class diagram this semester. And then what we do is, instead of coding, we don't have any code and we don't have any database. And the model itself is created visually, which creates the code and the database. Okay? So that's kind of also a pattern, and it's typically when you want to do more database design as opposed to modeling it through code, right? So again, some of these approaches work for different people in the industry, depending on where you sit from a creational perspective. Okay, so that's where the entity framework is pretty strong. Okay, and finally the code first from database approach. So the way this works, and this is kind of the way we're going to do it today, is you have an existing database, and then what you want to do is you want to use the you want to create code, but the code itself will be tightly coupled with the database. So anything that I change in my code, I could actually refactor the database as well. All right, so that's kind of a different approach than some of the other ones. So again, if we're going to choose, there's 4 different workflows, and depending on what your job is, I want to write code. Then you're going to, and if I'm creating a new database, then this is kind of like a little table. Then I want to use the code first approach. If I want to write code and need access to an existing database, I can use the code first approach. And then if I'm a designer, I want to use a designer. I don't want to write code. Then I can use the model first approach, and the same thing with the database first approach. If I want to access it to the existing data, if there's an existing database, this kind of stuff. So it really depends on what you want to do, and the Entity Framework allows us to connect to a database in different ways. One thing that we need to do is we need to add the Entity Framework as a NuGet package, because by default we don't have our database installed, or Entity Framework at all installed in our code. So let's take a look at that and see how that works. So I'm just going to close this down. So again, if I right-click on my project, right, there's a link that says Manage NuGet Packages. Manage NuGet Packages. So NuGet is like, I like to think about this as a package manager, similar to NPM that you'll be learning about next semester, as well as pip if you're using Python. There's tons and tons of package managers out there. So if I right click and say package, NuGet manage packages for our project, if I click browse, it's going to show us some of the most popular packages out there. And by the way, you can install things like not just the Entity Framework, but many other packages that you can install. So notice there's Entity Framework is like right here. Okay, so that is like what we want. If I click on the Entity Framework, one thing it'll ask me to do is it'll say install latest. Notice the latest version is 6.4. I've been using the Entity Framework for many years now, so I've been way back here. I've used the Entity Framework before Entity Framework version 5, and before that as well. So when I install it, I have to just click install, and what it's going to do in our project is install additional resources. So let's click install. By the way, are you with me? Are you doing this with me? For people who are doing it with me, please indicate with a check mark. And for people who are not doing it with me and you're just watching, maybe make your hand. And for people who are not doing it at all, maybe press an X. Some people are watching. That's good. I'm seeing that you guys are awake today. Thank you. All right, thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to click install. So when I click install for the Entity Framework, it's going to say, hey, are you installing this? Do you want to do this? And I'm going to say okay. And I accept. Again, I'm using a copy of lesson 11. I've just called it lesson 12. And what this does is it's now installed Entity Framework. Okay. That's how quick it is. And I'll be honest with you, before it was way, way longer than this, like super long. Now that we have the Entity Framework installed, we can apply certain tools in order for us to work this. By the way, there's tons and tons of stuff in here. If you ever have a chance to play around and take a look at other things that are in here, let's say for example, I was doing a web project and I wanted jQuery. I mean, I could like literally just put in there and there's jQuery, right? Or let's say I wanted Node, kind of stuff, Node.js, then you're going to see Node.js here. Or if I wanted to do something with TypeScript, then I could put in TypeScript, and then there's TypeScript, right? Anything I want, there it is. And whatever else I want, you can think about. Most popular libraries are in here. I want to use Bootstrap for my web application framework. There's Bootstrap. If I want to use Font Awesome, from my web application framework for icons, cool icons, there's Font Awesome, and so on. And there's tons and tons of stuff here using NuGet. And there's other things too. If you're using, if you're a C++ programmer, you want to use Boost. You can also go with Boost, all right, which is an awesome framework that works with C++ and other languages like that. So a ton of packages that are available through Microsoft's NuGet package manager that are up online. All right, so we've done the installation process, which is the kind of the heavy lifting part. And if I look at references now, in our references section here, you're going to see that there's Entity Framework and Entity Framework SQL Server right here. Okay, so that's things that you can see. Okay, so a couple of things we have in here that we didn't have before. So remember before what we had? We had our SQL Server Object Explorer in here, and we had a lesson 11b. And then when we did kind of tools for connection to our database, we used a data set. A data set is a different tool than what we use when we do Entity Framework. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So again, that's the first part. First is we install the Entity Framework, and there's only 2 more slides here. The next part is we want to do what it says here. We're going to make use of the Entity Framework, and we're going to use a new item, right? And we're going to create a new context. Okay, so now here it says student context, but we're going to make a contact context, which is kind of the same thing that we did before, right? So let's see if we can get this done. So we'll try it a couple ways, and then if I have to make a new project, I will as well. So I'm going to say add new item, and on the left, right, I want to click on data, and then notice that there is a bunch of stuff here, and there is something called a DB context generator, a new data set, and an ADO.NET entity data model. See this one? ADO.NET entity data model. And that's what we want to click, ADO.NET entity data model, right? This one. Now notice the name is called model, all right? Model 1. And what we want in here is we want to call it the contact model, because that's what we want. The model, what we're talking about, is just a class like contact that connects to our database. Okay, this is going to clash with what we have here already, and we're going to get rid of this. Okay, so let's go here and just call this the contact model. Another tool. Okay, I'm going to click add. It's going to ask me to connect, and now it's going to ask me which model, which approach do I want to use to connect to my database? Do I want to have some kind of empty code first model? That's another one we didn't talk about. There's no code, and you want to make it by yourself. A designer from the database, if I have an existing database, or do I want to use the code first approach? And this is the one I want right here. Notice that the other one, which is the model first approach, doesn't exist anymore. And why? Because in recent years, Microsoft has removed the visual designer tools by default from Visual Studio. Okay. Why? Because they're not as popular anymore as they used to be. Okay, code first from database is what I want. I'm going to click next. And now it says, hey, do you have a connection string? And indeed I do, right? It's MS SQL, local DB, blah, blah, blah. And it says, here is the connection string for my contact model. And it talks about what the connection is and all that kind of stuff. Here's my connection string. But what I want to do, because I have a less than 11 dB connection string, this one, I want to make a new connection, because I don't want to clash with what I already have, right? Because I already have a connection, I want to make a new one. So there's 2 options here. Now, one option is, am I connecting to a server, or am I connecting to a database file? A database file is a hard-coded file that lives inside of your project. That's not what we want. We want this one. This is okay too. You can actually make and extract the database file if you wanted to make a package, a project that is all-inclusive. Let's say, for example, you had a little database that you were packaging along with your application, and you didn't need the user to have their own little database server. Then this is a good solution. But this is the one we want, MS SQL Server, and this is going to be typical of what we do. Also, you can choose different kinds of providers. There's other options here to install other providers. We're not going to do that. We're going to click this and then click next, continue. All right, just like last time, it's asking us for a SQL Server client and what's the connection. I'm not going to pull this down. Please don't do that. We know it's local DB and then / MS SQL local DB. Okay, that's the important part. We want Windows authentication. You can also choose password, username and password in a real database scenario. But the trick is, can I pull down the database? And I have a database from last week, lesson 11B, that I'm connecting to. All right. Once I've got this and I press OK, now I've got a brand new connection. Okay, and we're going to call this the contact model. Okay, and typically what I want is the contact model connection is what I want. I don't want to call it the same thing because this is going to create a connection. That's all it is. Almost think about this as a connection string. That's what this is, contact model connection. Okay, and it's going to be stored in the app.config file. I'm going to click next. All right, and it looks at our data table. Like again, notice that we're doing this ahead of time. I'm clicking the table. I'm going into contacts. There's my contact table. It says pluralize or singularize generated object names. So contacts is going to become contact, like this. Okay, I'm going to click finish. Now I'm going to have a clash, like I said before, because I'm going to have a contact model, and the contact model is going to be of type DB context. It's inheriting from DB context. So I'm just going to close this down. Let's take a look at my project settings and see what this looks like now. Okay. So I've got my contact. Here's my contact. And notice my contact now has been overwritten, I think is the right thing to say. Take a look at that. My contact's still there. Varchar or varchar 50, if I go back to my SQL Server Object Explorer, and if I go over here to my contacts table, and if I want to look at the view designer, or sorry, I want to view my designer, not my data, right? Just designer, right? If I look at that, then what we're going to see is I'm going to have this design for my table, and this is my T-SQL code for it. So ID, first name, last name, email. Notice I'm using varchar 50 or varchar, depending on how you want to pronounce that. 50 and then 20 for my contact number. Well, if you look at my contact, if I look at contact, it has a string length of 50, and it's also required. Why is it required? Because in my DBO contacts, I've said I'm not allowing nulls. So you see there's a tight coupling between my contact class now and my database table. There's a tight coupling. One thing that we don't see is this ID, which is identity, right? Notice in my contact class, somehow now I have an ID where before I did not, right? And this is auto incrementing, so it's nothing that you're going to modify. It's going to come from the class, the database itself. Okay. So that is the database table itself. That is the database model. So contact, this contact object, right now we don't have it anywhere special, and also suddenly it's become a partial class. Before, it was our own class that we wrote. We wrote this class contact. Remember last week? Kind of get together. And we also have something else called the contact model. So there's two classes. There's a contact class, this class, and there's something called contact model, which is this class. The contact model class, what it does is it uses we have a database, a DB set, something different than before, that we're calling contacts. So contacts is our DB set, right, for the contact model. All right. So contacts is what it says here, a list. Think about this as a list of contacts. That's what this is. Which this right here relates to the table, because a table in essence is a list of records, and each record is directly related to our contact. Each record is a contact, in effect, right? So this is what this is. Okay. So that's what we've created, something called a DB context, and this is also a partial class, right? So notice that contact is a partial class, and contact model, that's a partial class, and the other part of the class we have is hidden. Remember, we have some hidden stuff. In our app.config now, we have two connections that we're using, okay? The first connection to support what we did last week was this, right? This is our way of using an ADO.NET connection. The old way, we're connecting to the database. And then we have the new connection. And the new connection is basically using our entity framework connection. So now what's happened is, here's our old one from last week. Here's our new one from this week. There's two connections to the database at the same time, but they support different functionality. The first connection type, what it does is it uses our catalog called 11DB. This is our database, right? But if you notice and both of them use the provider name SQL client. One of them, the second one, uses entity framework, right? The first one does not, okay? Both use integrated security, which is true, which means Windows login security. That's what these two do. But I have two different connections now to the database. Now, how does this affect my workflow? Well, if I press play right now, I'm going to get an error. Okay? I'm going to get an error. And why? Because, remember contact. Here's contact. And notice that I have a partial class, right? Partial class with single part is what it says, right? And notice that I do not have what I've been using our contact with. There's no constructor here for our contact. I can't mess with this class like I did before. This is not on my control anymore. This is tightly coupled to our collection. So if I look at my error list, and if I go to where it says a constructor that takes 4 arguments, which is in DB view form, this one, I can no longer do this. I can't make a new contact anymore that uses first name, last name, blah, blah, blah. Can't do that. In fact, this DB form load, where I want to map, do a one-to-one mapping between my contact and my database, it doesn't work like this anymore. Remember? Because the contact is the connection. Think about this as the model itself, contact. So just putting this out there, I can't do this because there is no constructor that's like this. However, I could make a new contact, right? So without any of this stuff, I could do this. Because we do have a default constructor, right? We could do this, and then, let me just undo that change for a second. And then what I could do is take all of this stuff, right, and map it separately. So let's say I could do something like, well, my new contact, as an example. So I'm going to make a new contact, and my new contact is going to be my contact.first name, my contact. I can fill it up, right, if I wanted to do that. However, it doesn't make any sense, and you'll see this in a second. So I'm just going to comment this out for now, which is going to cause a bit of a issue. But we're going to see that that's going to clear our error for now. So if I run it, you can see still we're getting this, and this is not connecting. Remember, this connection here has nothing to do with entity framework. This connection here in our data grid view is due to the way we had it done before. If I look at my DB view form, notice here nothing here has changed. We still have a less than 11 DB data set and all these binding and everything else, right? This thing here is now still working within our using our model, the old model. And we're converting. We're moving from ADO.NET into Data Entity Framework. Let's take a look at the last page here. So we've done our connection. We've created our code first model. We've done all those things. Now, what we want to do is we want to take a look at something that looks like this. So this is the code paradigm, if you will. Notice we're going to be using this using statement, a var, and then something called something context. All right. So I want to make a new model. I want to do this kind of stuff, right? And we're going to do something similar to this. In this case, the last time we did this was called student. Now we're making something called contact. It's going to be the same, all right? So this is where I want to add a new student. If I'm going to add a new student, this is how I would do it, right? Instead, what I want is for me to be able to if I want to read all students from the student table, then I would do a query using link, like that looks like this, from student or from contact in db.contacts, right? That's how I do it. But one thing I want to do is I want to create this new database context up here. So a database context. So going back to our code, right? Then, so if I click F7, you can see that when the form loads right now, what's happening is I'm using the contacts table adapter to fill in the context. This is okay, because this is using the old way of connecting, right? And here what I'm saying is var contacts, right? This is where I was trying to do this thing to list like we did last time. And I'm using this less than 11 dB data set for the context. Okay. Let's try doing this a different way altogether. Okay, so I'm just going to comment this out. For now, I'm just going to keep it commented out because we have our lessons from last week too, right? And I want to use that using statement. So I'm going to say using, and just like it says here, we're going to open up our brackets. We're going to use the var keyword. We're going to say db. That's the name of the database. We're going to refer to the database as, hey db, this is our database. That's going to be equal to, and again, what I want is our context, right? So not our contact model necessarily. Notice that we have a contact model and contact, right? Think about our model as the context, right? This is our connection to our database. So I want to make this our new, not a student, a new contact model, right? So I'm going to say new contact model. And that contact model is going to produce a connection to the database. Database, right, is our model. And inside our using statement, this is kind of an interesting way of doing things. Anything inside of our using statement is going to include DB. So DB lives in here, okay? So what I'm actually doing with the using statement is wrapping a closure around this variable. I'm creating almost like a closure that says, hey, I want to make a model, and inside this model, inside this closure where this DB lives and breathes, I'm going to create this connection here. So the next part is I want to create I want to query all the students and DB students. Let's try that. So in this case, it's DB contacts. All right, so I'm going to say, and my query is going to be I want to read everything. So I'm going to read from the database. I want to just show you this, right? And I'm going to say var query, and I want to do the same thing. I want to look at from student, and notice it says DB students. So from contact in db.contacts. So from contact in, and contact should be lowercase, even though it doesn't like me doing that. Autocorrect is just putting that in there. In db.contacts. All right. It's interesting. Where did db.contacts come from? Well, it came from this contact model. That's where it came from. So for every contact in contacts is what we're saying, right? For every contact in contacts, then I want to order by. So when I go order by let's say my last name this time, contact dot last name, and let's talk about why this isn't working in a second, and then select contact just like we did before. All right, so that's what this is doing. Select contact, and then it's like, okay, so I don't know what contact is. Contact does not exist in the current context. I use local variable contact before it's declared. La 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 la. So let's take a look at this and see what has happened. So one thing is that we want to create a new contact up here, right? So let's do that. So we're going to say that we need contact to store an object of type contact. So we're going to say var contact is equal to a new contact. All right. So that takes care of that issue, right? DB, right, is what we want. We want to connect to our contact context, right? Because what's happening is we're saying for every contact, for every contact, students from student, and this is not something we're missing. So from contact, right, in DB contacts. So where it says contact here, let me just comment this out for 1 sec. So from contact in DB contacts, right? By the way, if you don't have this extra iOrder stuff, it's because I'm using ReSharp or C#. So that's what this does. So for every contact is an object. Select the contact, and query itself is a list of contacts. Remember, what we want to do is we want to convert this query. We want to convert this query, this whole thing here. So this whole thing here, from here to here, just like we did last time. Want to convert this whole query to list. All right, and what query will now have is a list of contacts, just like we've done from the past, from what we did down here. But instead of it connecting to the data set, we're connecting to our entity data model. That's what this is, because our contact model now, this is our entity framework. So it's kind of similar, right? One uses our contact model, the other one uses the other way of doing things. I'm still getting a list of contacts here. Okay, just to show you. So now it's a direct correlation. So let's do a bit of a for each loop. So for each, and I want to kind of print out. Let's try that again. For each in our, and which collection are we talking about? It's in the query collection. That's what it's what it is, and the variable is going to be called contact. So for every contact in the query, right, then I want to debug.writeLine, let's say the contact last name, right? So we're going to say the contact.last name. Okay, I just want all the last names. So remember, we have nothing to do with this other data set now. We're connecting directly through the entity framework. And let's think about what we can do, how much more powerful that is, as opposed to using a data set the way we did it before. And by the way, I just want to point this out. I can have multiple tables in the data set that's relational, right? Whereas before, it doesn't work the same with our ADO.NET data model. All right, so let's see if I can actually write out. So this part here has nothing to do with this part here. Just want to make sure you understand that. So whether we have the data set or not, we can still do this. Whereas if we didn't have a data set, then we couldn't do this. Okay, so that's what this is. Let's connect and let's see what happens. Yeah, there it is. Banner, Kent, Parker, Stark, and Strange. And notice it's in a different order, right? Because what we've said here is that we are just going to order by last name, which is going to be, if I take this out, it'll be the exact same order. Let's just show that again. So Peter, Parker, Stark, Banner, Strange, and Kent. Parker, Stark, Banner, Strange, and Kent. So this is what we're getting. Nothing to do with this, with our entity data framework. One thing that this allows us to do, this thing here, once we have our entity data model, I can do full CRUD, create, read, update, and delete on the model, which is more difficult to do, not impossible, but more difficult to do with ADO.NET. But this supports a connection to the database, like I said, that is tightly coupled. I didn't write this code. It was written for me, and if instead of me making my own contact class, it's been made, right? So that's the advantage of this system altogether. Okay, so hopefully you understood how that worked out. Now, how do I carry forward the data from our database, right? Well, all this work that I did last time, where I had to, create a contact class, and I had to carry it from one thing to the other, and all that stuff. And I just want to also show you this in our program.cs file. Remember our program.cs file? This is different now. We have a contact, a list of type contact called contacts, right? and I can create a list just like this, like I did before, but this now is redundant. I don't need to do this anymore because it's been done for me in my contact model, which is the context, right? So this I can get rid of. I don't need this one at all. And same thing goes with this, because now this is something that's alive. My database is alive, and I have nothing to do. There's no component that I have to drop in or anything like that. It's part of our data set, right? So in my second form, which is my contact info form, here's my contact info form. And if I was looking at the code here for a second, so let's say view code. So what this does is it's a little different, okay? It's a little bit different. And what I'm doing here is if I use the open tool strip menu item, I can still open it up from from using Streamreader. And what I can do is I can take the contact list box and open it up. So this is all the same. Nothing changes here because all I'm doing is loading it up. But what about in our DB view form? In our DB view form, remember, we also have a little file menu for save. So how do I save stuff now? Because, well, this isn't going to work anymore, right? Our save toolstrip menu item.click, there really isn't a program.context where I'm going to save everything. So how would I do this now? This is not the same, right? Well, remember that I don't need a context anymore. I have it here, contact model. Contact model is a list of contacts. That's what it does, right? So this for each loop, like I said, even this one for that matter, is kind of redundant. I don't need it. If I want to loop through, this is how I want to do it, like this. This is our model for how we want this to be done. I need to create this DB contact model again, this using statement, in order for me to do that. So all of this is gone. Don't need all that code anymore. A lot of this code is handled for me now, right? And I don't need this because I don't need to print this out anymore. In fact, I don't need even this whole connection because this whole connection is just me just reading again, right? We're going to come back to this later on because I want to fill in the data grid view with potentially my entity framework. But for now, I just want to copy this, right? And by the way, if I want this to be available, and I only want to do it one time. So, for example, I want to create a context that I can use throughout the entire form. I don't have to do it here. This is only done here, and this is going to create a connection or connect to our framework kind of right away. One thing to note is that when I make a connection to the entity data framework, it's connected to my entire application. I don't have to make an individual connection like this one, which is me making a data set. I don't have to do that. All right, so if I take this just for now, and let's go into our save toolstrip menu item, and basically it's going to kind of take the place of what we're doing in here. Okay, so I want to do a what happened there? I want to first of all delete this, sorry. And what I want is for me to copy all this, so Control C, and I want to click down here underneath the stuff to write, and then Control V. So I want to make a new database context. This is another way of doing it. I don't want to do this right now, okay? Because I'm just saving this to the file. I'm going to query the contact in DB contacts, all right, or whatever. I'm not going to select it. I'm going to basically create a list. So query is now my list, is this list, this contacts list. Okay, that's what this is. Okay. Now I can't read this out to the context. So what this does is it creates the idea of me having context. So I could say something like contacts is equal to a list of contacts from the database. That's what this is. Okay. And then for each, just like I have this for each, I can do this stream writer, right? Where I can do for every contact in my contacts, right? I want to write out to the stream writer all the contact stuff because I already have that information. Again, I don't have to have an extra structure for this. And this would take care of that problem. Okay? So that's what this does. So this is going to be a rewrite of what we did before. So again, just using the entity data framework as opposed to my own construct, or my own list. I don't need another list. I've created it here. It was created for me, right? Which is something that I like. And remember, now I can do full CRUD as well. I can have other forms in here that allow me to connect to the database, edit the database, and we're going to do that in a bit, and a bunch of other stuff. Again, let's leave this as is. This is just an example of us reading. So this is kind of reading from the database. That's what this does, right? Because we connect the connection to the database. That's what the DB is. The DB is our connection to database, and then I can look at any table in the database, db.context. I might have, in our contact model, we might have other tables in the future, not just a context table, but maybe something else, right? And we could think about DB as your namespace. Anything that's inside the database is the namespace for the context, right? So here, I don't need this for now. Let's just get rid of this for now because we have our data grid view. Okay. So this is kind of, hey, I'm displaying the data in tables. All right, that's what this is. Here, I'm saving the data in the file. Let's see if this still works. If I can save the data again, and let's suppose that I didn't have my file name. I'm going to write over it, right? So I'm going to press play. Let's see how this works. I'm going to press File, Save. It's going to give me the file. Instead of contact list, let's call it contact list 2 to test it. Contact list 2. And save. All right? We don't know if it worked. And then if I go next, you see there's nothing there. If I press File, Open, and I'll look at contact list 2, so I've saved it again, and press Open, you can see now it's back. Right? So I've got all this details in here. Which kind of reads from the database and plops it into this list, right? And depending on which item I want to click on here, I want to display some stuff over here, like I said from before, right? So this is kind of our info, okay? So it did that work for me. It kind of connected to the database using entity data framework, and did all the same work that we did before. We just have it in a more tightly coupled connection with a database than we had before, okay? We're using still 2 connections at this point. We're still using the connection that we had before, the ADO.NET connection, as well as our entity framework connection. Eventually, we're going to get rid of the other one. Okay, so that's the first piece. Let's modify our contact info form. So when I click on one of the items in here, it's going to fill in some details over here, right? Now remember that in our DB view form, we have these fields: first name, last name, email address, and contact, right? So I want to have these same kind of fields. I don't care much for the ID. The ID is going to be automatically generated for me, right? Because it's coming from the database. So for now, what I want to do is in my designer, I just want to put in these fields. So I'm going to open up my toolbox, just like we've done before. Again, this is good practice for you guys. And I'm going to drag and drop a label in here, right? So the label is going to be here. And, thinking about it before we get into this, what might be best is to put this inside of some kind of group box. So let's go into containers and grab a group box. And this is going to be my contact info group box. This is where this is going to go. We probably can make this a little narrower because this is going to be our contact list where we're going to select from a contact list. Okay. And in here, I want to put all that stuff. Let's configure it. So if I go to properties, just like before, and I want to call this the contact list box, or contact group box. Contact info group box might be best. All right, that's what that is. I don't care about having a title, so let's get rid of our group box text. So we don't want to see that. We just want to group it so that way I can move it around if I need to. And now I'm going to drag and drop a label in there. So in the group box, we're dragging and dropping a label. The label is going to say, first name. So this will become first name label. Right? So we'll say first name down here. Again, this is just how easy it is. And we'll also do our text box for this. So we'll say text box underneath the label. Right? We'll make the text box span a little bit bigger. Maybe we'll make it the whole length of the group box because it could be long first name, long last name, and so on. So we'll call this the first name label, first name text box, first name text box, right? We'll also make this first name text box read only for now, so you can't mess with it. You can only read from it, true. So, and if it's read-only, we want to change the background so that it doesn't show this gray background. I think that's pretty ugly. So we're going to go into our back color and change it from control to white, right? Which is going to make it look like normal. And our forecolor, instead of control text, we're going to make that into black to make sure that it's black text, not gray. Because by default, when it's read-only, it's grayed out. I'm going to grab these two things and control drag down so I can create other things. And we'll modify the names in a second. So this will be the, up here, this will be the last name label. Again, this is all practice. Okay, and then, because you're going to need to do this for your final assignment, on your test next week, last name. And this will be the last name text box. Oh, if I can only spell it properly. And this will be the last name, where it goes in. It's still read only. All that stuff gets preserved because I did this first name, last name, and I want to do email address and contact number. So let's continue. So grab the next one. Actually, let's grab them all because it's going to be very similar to this. So again, control drag at the bottom. So we're going to have these things here. So I'm just aligning it so with our alignment. And notice that part of it is outside of the box, so we can make this box a little bigger, right? Just to make sure that it houses our information, first name, last name, and then this one, instead of first name, is going to be the email address label. This will be the email address text box, email address text box. We have lots of room for names. We're also going to change the label so it says email address. I'm sure you guys are ahead of me. Email address, if you're following along. And the same thing goes with the contact number. So this will be the contact number label, and this will be the contact number text box. Okay, label and text box. This should say contact number. Let's change that. Contact number. Yeah, excellent. All right, so what I want to do, and let's realign this because this is you know, the text, the group box is a little funny. I want to align it so that the group box and the top of the info, we might say that the group box now will have a title. So let's say what the title is, contact information. There's our contact information. If I can spell contact properly. There we go. Contact information, right? And that shows first name, last name, email address, and so on. Let's pull this down so it aligns with the top of this part right here. So we can choose this, and it goes into here. This is our little menu. And we're going to add to the menus today as well. But I want it, when I click here, I want this to be filled out. Okay, when I click in here. So let's run this thing and see how it looks. So click next, and then I want to be able to click one of these items. So if I press open and I select, let's say, contact list 1, and I click banner, once I select it, then it's going to fill this in. Okay. So how does this work? Well, it's an event again. So here is the contact list, and you can see that there is a selected index changed event. That's the default one. When I click on this, it's a selected index changed. So if I double click, it's going to create an event, so my contact list. So when my selected index is changed, I'm going to load up my stuff, right? Now what I want for the selected index, right, is for my contact list text box, my contact list box, right? I want to know what the index that's changed is, right? Because what I want to display, I want to remember, I'm going to use the identity framework to do this for me, right? So if I say contact list box dot, which ones do I have access to? So you notice I have selected index. Selected index is what I want. So let's print out selected index is actually an integer, and if I go toString, all right, then what I can do is let's put that out. So debug dot write line, and I'll add the debug to references. Let's do that. Debug.writeLine. All that did was on the top here, it added system diagnostics in order for me to do a debug.writeLine. Okay, that's what this did. And I want to just print it out. So whenever I click on it, I want to see which ones it is. And I want the selected index. The number, where 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatever it's going to be. Okay. So let's do that. So let's go here and let's see what that gives us. So if I go to next, and if I press File, Open, and I'll open up the contact list and press Open. And if I click this, it's going to give me 0. And if I click this, it's going to give me 2. And if I click this, it's going to give me 1. Right? So you can see that whenever I click one of these, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, it's going to give me those things. And remember what's happening here. When I load it from the file, this thing here, my list box, is going to be coming from the file anyway. Whatever I click on here is what I want. So if that's true, if I'm already loading up from the file, and what's happening is, as I load up, I load the items inside of my list box in order, right? So this is what this is doing. I'm reading from my file, and I'm loading the items in, right? Remember, the item that I'm loading in, I've ignored the first item and the third item and the fourth item. I ignored these things, and all I've done is I've added to the contact list box the stuff that I want. So I want you to think about this. I've loaded it from the file, and I've ignored this stuff here. This is coming from the file, not from the database. Right here. But wouldn't it be nice if that when I load this up, it goes somewhere, some kind of structure, right? Because I want it to be preserved so that I can use it in our file, right? So remember, we do have this contact object. The contact object houses first name, last name, email address, and contact number. And I also have this idea of our DB contacts, but that's our contact list. So here what we can do is we can create a list of contacts that I can use, right? That I can, when I load things up from the file, I can have a list of contacts locally on my DB form. So DB view form, right, and contact info form, those are two different things. All right, let's take a look at that. So again, if I'm going to my contact info form here, at the top of my form, I could put in a new property. So I want to create a new list. So if I go prop, it's going to be, the type is going to be, a list of type contact. That is totally doable, right? Which we're going to call contacts, right? That makes sense. So there's our contacts list, right? And that wrote itself for me. I didn't have to do much there. List of contact called contacts. It's local to our file, to our project, so or to our thing, because all we're doing is we're loading it up and displaying it, right? And now this is coming from file, right? Because this is what I want you guys to do for things. So instead of doing it this way, where we're reading it in and I'm adding it directly to our contact list box. I want to do this, but I also want to read it into our contacts. So remember, our contacts list of contacts is by default empty. There's nothing going on here, right? And when I load up my file, when I load up my form for the first time, so when I load this form up, right? Remember that there is the form load event I could use. I don't want to use the open toolstrip menu. I mean, I could use the open toolstrip menu item here as well to initialize the list again, to reinitialize everything, which is okay. So let's do it that way too. Let's try that. So we'll say that inside, whenever I open a new file from that's of type contacts, then what I want to say is that contacts, right, is equal to a new list of type contact. I need to do this because what this does is it instantiates the list container. Now this is not to be confused with the list box. It's not a list box. This is an actual list container that we're going to be using. So while I'm reading the stream this time, while I'm reading the stream, I want to create a new contact to add to the contact list. So I'm going to say var contact is equal to a new contact. All right, so contact is equal to new contact. I made a new contact like the contact model, right? And what I want now is I want to configure the contact. So I'm going to say contact dot, and then first name is how I stored everything. Well, that's equal to streamreader dot readline. Okay, so I'm just configuring it this way. I don't have a I'm not simplifying it. The thing. So this is no longer required because I'm going to read it the way it is. And then the same thing goes for the other ones. So I'm just going to copy paste these really quickly. And this will be last name. And this will be email address. And this will be contact number. And then what I want to do is I want to say that from my list, I want to keep my list box the same, but instead of reading it again, I want to take my last name, my contact last name, which is this, and put that there, contact dot last name. So I can populate my list from my contact last name. Now it says, there's a little curly brace, it says possible null assignment to non-nullable entity. But we know that I'm going to be reading from this. And it's just warning me that I might get something that's empty. Okay. So that's what this does. So we just refactored it a little bit so we can read everything in, and we're reading it into a contact list, right? So that's what this does. And what I want to do is, once we have our contacts and we've read them in, depending on which one I click, the contacts are going to be read in the same order. This has nothing to do with our database now, right? It's on a file, right? So what I want is when I click something down here, contact list box dot selected index changed, I want my list, which I've defined up here of contacts, I want my contact list, right, to display the contact as per the selected index. That's what I want. Okay, so this does this. So first let's do this part. Let's see if this works still. Do I still see everything? And we should, right? Because we're just going to get the contact name and we're good to go. If I go File, Open, and if I look at the contact list, then we're still good, right? This doesn't do anything yet. Okay, this doesn't do anything yet. But when I click here now, I want to fill this up with whatever the index is from the list. So then what we can do is we can say that when the selected index is changed, whatever the selected index is going to be the index that I'm going to use for the list. So I'm going to say that, let's fill in the data now. So I'm going to say that the first name text box dot text, well, that's going to be equal to our list contacts with the selected index. So which is our contact list listbox dot selected index. So whatever we use, we're going to get that contacts, right? Now it says that, and we want, of course, the first name. There, okay? So first name text box, that's the place we're going to display the first name that's inside the contacts, and we're going to use the contact list selected index. Whatever the index we chose from the contact list is going to be the index of the list or array, whatever you want. And we just need to do this over and over again. So we're going to say copy, paste a bunch of times. This will be the last name text box, and this will be the last name, right? And if I can spell properly, this will be the I cannot email address text box, and that'll be the email address, and this will be the contact name text box, contact text box, contact number text box, and this will be the contact number. All right, so that's how it's going to work. So I know it's a big long line, but really it's not that difficult to look at. So we have a contact list, a list of type contact. We defined it up here, a list of type contacts. The contact is coming from our new model that we made from our database. All right, so it's directly in line with what we've done, right? It's tightly coupled to our database. And now we have a contact, this new contact, that is compatible with our database, which is really an important thing. Here we've loaded it up and we've added to the list box our last name, so we can display the last name in our list to display which one we want. And then what we're going to do is when I click on it, I'm going to display that object to the list box. All right, so let's do that. So click next, and then click File, Open. I'm going to go to Contact List 1, doesn't matter. And then if I click Kent, we get an error. Okay, so let's take a look and see what the error is. It says system argument out of range, index was out of range, right? It must be non-negative and less than the size of the collection. Okay. So what happened? Well, one thing we did not do, right, is we did all this. We made a new contact, but we never added it to the collection. Darn. Forgot to do that. So at the bottom, what we need to do is to make this work is we need to say that contacts.add our new contact. That's what we need to do because there is no contact yet. So we have to add or build up our collection. This is what this thing does here. So add our new contact to the contacts collection, or the list, right? That's what it says, right? Let's try that again. So next, we're going to go File, Open. We're going to open it from the contact list, and we're going to click on Kent, and yeah, good to go. Parker, Stark, Strange, and you can see that all that changes. Now we can select it, but we can't modify it. Right? I can't modify it because it's read-only. But this gives a way of connecting with this thing and modifying it. So what if, this is a great way. If I want to modify the file, no problem, I can do so. But this is a way of reading it. Now that I have this as an example, what if I want to add a new item, to the database or to the file? I could do that. And this structure that I've created, where I can click one of these items, and this is using a list. There's other structures you can use here instead of a list. You can use a combo box. Let's take a look at that instead. All right. So if I was to go to my contact info form, here's contact info form, and if I look at my toolbox, here's the toolbox. You can see that I have a list box, which is what I used, and I also have a other kinds of things. One of them is a combo box. All right. So let's put that in there too. So here's my combo box. A combo box is like a pull-down menu. A list box, it just shows us the list, like in a long list, and it's always open. Whereas a combo box is like a traditional pull-down. Now there's two options for the combo box. One of them looks like this. And let's take a look and see how this looks. So this is, we'll just call this the contact list or contact combo box, just to be same. I'm putting both in here so you can see the difference. So if you scroll down, you can see that drop down height is 106. Drop down style is drop down. Okay, that's the drop down. So there's two drop down styles. There's drop down and there's simple, and there's also drop down list, which kind of looks like this. So drop down, simple, and drop down list. Let's look at drop down for a second. And I want to connect the same thing that I've done here to my combo box to see what the difference is, so you understand the advantages and disadvantages to this structure. All right. So now if I click on the event for this one, when my selected index is changed, so it's the same as this. Selected index change, selected index change. So if I double click on this, it's going to create that selected index change. So it's like I had my contact list box selected index change. So if I did this, then it might be good. Let's just copy this and paste it, because the same thing, contact list box, contact combo box. So copy paste. So you can see that. So I want to enable both to work. Okay. That's why I'm doing. So that way you can see the difference between one or the other. I wouldn't do this normally. I would actually only have one, not both typically. But I wanted to show you this because so you can see how this works. So that's the first thing. So whenever my contact combo box changes, then I'm going to do this. We also need to load up stuff. So when I load my form, not only do I want my contact list box to be added in, but let's add also in my, just to be safe, my contact combo box items dot add. We'll do the same thing. We'll add them, well, the same item to my contact combo box, so you can see both ways of doing things, and then you guys can see what you prefer in terms of our user interface. All right, and then you've seen both. So I go here. You can see now that I have this little funky tool here, right? And if I press File, Open, and I look at my contact list and press Open, then what happened? Well, here I have to drag it down for me to see this list, right? And there's nothing that's selected. Whatever I select comes up here. So if I click Banner, you can see now that Banner is selected. If I click Strange over here, Strange is selected out here, but Banner doesn't change down here. Right? These are unlinked. You can link them up too, by the way, if you really want to. But I'm not going to. Can't. It's like can't. This all works same way as before. But before, when it loaded up before, let's say if I go back and I stop this, and let's try this again. Notice that the difference. This one, if I press File, Open, and I click the Open file, automatically I have data here. It doesn't show by default. Dangers. If I click this, right? Notice that I clicked one and then I clicked the other, and then now it gave me this exception out of range error, right? The contact list selected index changed event, right? It, first of all, what is the selected index? My selected index was -1. See that? -1. How did I get a -1 on my selected index, right? Well, remember we said that there's a danger that you might have a problem if there's nothing selected? That can happen. And let me show you this thing. So if I press Start again, and if I go here and just select something, right? Like let's say I try and select something that doesn't exist, right? Let's be sure that this doesn't mess me up. But what about if I do File, Open, and then go here and then select something down here, like that's outside of the range, right? Like out of range. Well, this is where I'm going to get this really weird error, right? Can I get the same problem with my contact combo box? So let's see. So click here, File, Open, and then can I do that? Well, no, because I only have these to grab. So I'm always going to get. So this is potentially give me an issue, because I could have a space down here that can cause me to select something that doesn't exist. Remember, anything that I select, even an empty index, it's going to mess up. So this, maybe not the best example. But what if I want this to look like this? Well, let's do a design. So if I go to my contact info form again, remember that I have an option that I can change the way this looks. My drop-down style, instead of being drop-down, I can change it to something else, like a drop-down list. Now, it's grayed out by default, and I'm not happy with that, but let's take a look and see what that looks like. So again, I'm going to go here. You can see that that's grayed out. Nothing there. There's nothing I can click. And when I load it, File, Open, and Contact List, then kind of the same, right? It's not like I can, it's just a different way of looking at it. Okay, so it's kind of darker style. So that didn't really do what I wanted. Well, what else? How about drop-down style simple? Well, now let's take a look at this. So what if I made this drop-down style look like this? Okay, let's see how this looks now. So drop-down style simple. All right, let's run this thing and then see what the difference is. And next, and then no, look, this looks kind of like what we had before. Let's go File, Open, and does it present the same problems as before? Well, no, because I got this little thing here. So this thing is kind of what I wanted over here with the list, isn't it? Right? I want to have my banner, but I can't click on something that doesn't exist. I can only click on the stuff that's there, and as soon as I click on something, then we're good to go. You can also give it a default. So for example, let's say I want my selected index, when this loads up and when I click this, I also want my selected index to be selected, right, automatically. So first of all, let's get rid of this contact list box. This is no good, right? If I get rid of this, just to let you know, right, if I go to my contact info form now, this doesn't exist. Can I delete this? Well, yes, because I deleted my list box. So if I run this again, it's not going to crash, is it? Well, it doesn't exist, it says. So this part has to be changed too. Let's make sure that we modify the ones we want to. And also, you know, maybe you want to change the design of the contact info form so it's not down here, it's kind of up here, because that may look a little better, right? We don't have to make so many, less items here if you want to. So that's what's going to come up. We can also align it with the top of this one. One thing that I can't do is I can't change the size that's in here. It's going to be the same size as the font style, all right? And you can say that this could be a contact list. So maybe you want to put some kind of label. So I'll put that label out here, let's say. I just copy pasted that one, okay? And this one will be the contact list label. Contact list label. And on the bottom, I'll just say contact list. Contact list. Okay. Choose the contact. And if I run it, we're still good to go. Still got the contact list. Can't select anything here because nothing's selectable. I'm trying clicking to break it right now. Nothing can break. For file open, if I go contact list and open, you can see this. And if I click this, it's going to do the same thing I did before. But I want it to automatically take the first one, whatever that first one is, and highlight it like this. That's what I want. That's the effect I want. So how do I do that? So in my contact info form, when I load up my open toolstroke menu item, click, and I load everything up, after I've done this and I've loaded everything and I've closed the stream. By the way, we can break this down into some methods so that way we can clean this little thing up. But let's suppose. Then at the bottom, after I've closed everything, what I can say is my contact combo box dot selected index is equal to 0. I can specify. Now, if I did this, guess what's going to happen? My selected index is going to trigger the selected index changed event down here, and it's going to fill things in. Let's see if that works. Because remember, it's the selected index changed, right? So next, and I'm going to say File, Open, and I'm going to open this up, and then yeah, right? Opens it up and gives me something by default. All right, are you with me? Do you get what I did? Let's see if I check marks if you understand what I'm doing. X if you're still not clear. I mean, that's nice. Hand if I don't know what the hand means, but let's use check mark for yes, you understand, and X if you don't get it. And then I can go over some of that again. So I got some hands. This is good. You guys are getting what I'm saying and the workflow that I've got going on. Okay, great. So this is, thank you for that. So this is kind of the way we do it. Now, danger. What if, you know, the file that I'm reading is empty or is somehow it's not created properly? That is an issue, right? Now, if somehow the user makes its own file and puts it in there, it can crash your code, right? So, for example, if I do file open again, what if I also load up another file? So I want to load up this file again. What does this do? Well, right now it doesn't do anything, right? But that could be an issue, right? If somehow I modify my original file manually and then it doesn't match this stuff somehow. So we could wrap everything in a try-catch to make sure that you're going to get good data, right? Remember, there is no validation at this point. This is just reading and writing. One thing we did last week, and I want to just shift gears for a second. Let's put this up on GitHub first of all, so you have everything. So changes, here's all my changes. I changed my lesson name and so on. I changed all this stuff. I added entity framework. But for now, what we're going to say is, we're just going to say added EF, entity framework. And we modified the contact info form. So it can kind of read, right? And I showed you two options. One, the list box, the other one, the contact combo box or combo box. Personally, for me, I like the combo box. It has better flexibility than the list box. There's nothing wrong with the list box if it's going to stay open all the time and it's going to be created so that it's the correct length. Like if you're going to drag and drop items out of the list box or into the list box, it's okay. Combo boxes are really great because they have a pull down. You can also have a little scroll bar if there's more data in there, and it's only going to show you the data that's in there. Okay, no empties for the combo box. Let's push this up. So home, sync, and push. And I've given you a new repository up online, which is COMP123 M2020 lesson 12 for today. Right, so that way you have everything you need. Okay, so this is good. So we've got this, but wouldn't it be nice if instead of me making my own menu, that it had everything that I needed, right? So if I go back to my designer, and let's go to my DB view form. What I did last time was I made this menu here from scratch, right? But the menu itself has a little smart icon over here. Notice that it says Insert Standard Items. If I click this Insert Standard Items, it's actually quite interesting. It does this. It inserts everything for you, right? Like new, open, save, save as, print, blah, blah, whatever. All these things. It adds everything for you. It'll add it even if you have your own, like mine. I have mine, right? So if you wanted to use all of these, right? File, new, open, blah, blah, blah. You could. Now, not all of this makes sense, right? For example, print preview, edit, my tools, if I have any tools, whatever, help. But I want to keep some of them. I want to keep the help menu because, it's there. I don't care about the contents, but I do want the about box. Let's do that. So again, I'm going to get rid of this one because I already have that one. And I don't care about the edit menu. Let's get rid of that. And the tools menu, let's get rid of that. But I like the help menu, and I don't care about the contents. One thing that I note is it's easier to destroy than to build, right? Here, it's already made for you. I can just accept what's there, and I don't have to make it. Let me just get rid of this separator too, delete. And the about box, I want to use a standard about box by Microsoft to show me a little bit about the build information, about who, what this is, and so on, right? So that's part of your assignment. So how do I do that? Well, I need to add a new item for me to do that. So I'm going to go to my project. I'm going to go to add. I'm going to go to new item. And under new item, notice that there is, I want to look for something called an about box. It's right here, about box. And an about box is a custom form is what this is. So this is called the about box form. That's what I'm going to call it, about box form. And the about box form creates a new form for me that's like this. Now this is a default image. I recommend for your application that you change this image if you're doing Dollar Computer, the assignment number 5. So this makes sense for you. But one thing it does, it says product name, version, copyright, company name, and so on. And you can add anything in there you want. Also, you can configure it just like any other forms. If I go back down in here, I can go back to the title of the form, right, or the text of the form, like all this stuff. See where it says about box? The text says about box form. We can just say about, right? And where is this information coming from? Well, if I right click on the about box form, it's a default form, and if I go F7, you can see it has some other information in here. For example, a text, which is the assembly title, and the label, which is my product name, whatever that is. And where is this stuff coming from? So if I go to my project and I go to properties, then under the project properties, there's something called assembly information. And in here, you're going to see the title, the description, the company, copyright 2020, and so on, right? So that's what's going to come up, right? So we can say something like demo project for lesson 12, not lesson 11. Right, so let's modify this to lesson 12, right? And we can change the assembly version and the file version if we want to. There's also something called a GUID, which is the ID of the application, all right? And then I press OK. So once I've done this, and if I run my project, what I want is when I click on my DB view form, and if I click on the about object here, this about object, notice there's a little underline. That little underline is almost like a quick hit, and you can actually change your menu. So if you put an ampersand in front of the letter inside of your menu, it'll make a little underline up here, which indicates the quick menu object for this, right? Almost like a shortcut key, right? And you can create your own shortcut keys for your menu items as well. For example, I could say that if I want to see the about box, and if I press something like Control Shift A, Control Shift and then A, right? Then my Control Shift A will show my about box. That's what I want. And it actually shows the quick hit menu right here. Control Shift A. Same thing with file. File, save. If I want file, right? I can put a ampersand in front of the F, right? And if I want to click save, right? Then I want to put an ampersand in front of the S, just to show that S is the main letter. And for my shortcut keys, I want to press Control S, which is the standard way of saving stuff. If I want to open up the file, then I want to use by default for the file itself, there is no shortcut keys for the file, but I could make it so that if I press Alt and S, Alt and F as an example, let's say I want to show the file menu. I could do that. Alt F for the file menu, right? So let's do this now. And then in my help about, double click on this help about. It's going to create a about tool strip menu item. And what do I want to do? I want to show my about box. Now this is okay. It is, I don't need to instantiate an object typically. But remember, I can't just do this. I can't say, hey, aboutbox.show. I can't go aboutboxform.show. It doesn't work because there is no aboutbox form. I want to instantiate it for the first time. Now we can do the same things we did before. We could instantiate it ahead of time in my program, which is also a good practice, so I don't have to make more than one. If I do this, then I instantiate one. Every time I click on about, I instantiate a new one. I don't want that. It doesn't make sense. So I want to make one that's always there. So on my program.cs, just like we did before, I'm going to go here and say public static. It's just a form, right? And it's going to be the about box form, which we're going to call about box form. And here, this is going to be called the about box form. So about box form is equal to a new about box form. Okay. Same thing as we've done before. One thing to note is it says about box form is inconsistent accessibility for the about box form because my about box form by default is not something I wrote. Let's take a look at the about box form code, and notice that it's a partial class, but it's not a public partial class. Let's make this public. If we don't do this, then our form is not accessible, and we're going to have that error that we just saw. Program.cs now, we're okay. And if I run it now, and if I go to help about, then, oh, I forgot to put that in there. Let's try that out again. So I'm going to go back to my DB view. And in here, I want to say program.aboutboxform.show. And now this show, there's a different way of doing this. Is this a show or show dialog? So if I go show dialog, what this means is my program cannot continue until I press OK. That's different than a show. And you can do that for any form, by the way. You can call show dialog, just like we've done with the open file dialog, save file dialog. You know, show dialog instead of just show. If I press OK, and notice I'm not hiding anything. So I'm going to go file about. Now I can't do anything here until I click OK. Notice it says, here's my company name and blah, blah, blah. That's what the about form does. It just shows the about information about my project. And by the way, if I do this and I press help about, notice it didn't make the form go over here, but actually made it in the center of this form. That's another thing about this form. This form is context sensitive, so it'll make it follow your main application wherever it is, right? So it'll pop up wherever that application goes. So that is your about box. I've shown you how to do that. This is one thing that's required for your assignment number 5. All right, cool. It'd be nice if you had your name in there though. So how do we modify that? So again, if I look at my about form and if I look at the form itself, it says product name and version and control. All these things are objects, right? Look, take a look. These are all things. Now, one thing to note is that we have at the top, right? At the top, we have a table layout panel. Take a look at that. Now you know how to do table layout panel. Let's take a look at edit rows and columns. So notice that we have 2 columns, a 2-column layout. Column 1 is for the picture. Column 2 is for all this stuff. Okay, so that's not going to change. I want to modify my rows. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So notice 6 is the button. That's where I put my button. So what I want to do is I want to insert a row above, and this is 50%. See how this row here, row 5, which is this big description, is 50%. Let's make this 40%. And I want to insert a row above this one. So I want to add a row, right? And I want to drag it. So one thing to note is this row here, which is an absolute row, right? Notice how I don't have the controls that I want to add this row up. So let's like delete that again. And I want to, if I insert a row, if I click here and click insert, right, it's going to insert it above this row, which is what I want. So this one I want to go from my percent from is going to be 10%. So let's move this to a 10% for that row as well, which is going to give me some space to put stuff. There, right? But what if I don't want to put my row there? I want to put my name, my author name on the top, because product name, version, copyright name, but I could do that. I could just insert it on top. But here's where I want to put this thing, and I want to take the same style from my label, right? Notice that this is just a label company name. I want to take the same label and I want to control drag it in here, but it's locked, right? I can't, notice I can't do anything. I could do control C and then control V, but they would put that label down there. That's not what I want. So I might as well go to my toolbox and drag and drop my label into there. Okay. Now I want to point some stuff out. So notice here it says that my text align is middle left, but this one, my text align is top left. I need to change that. Middle left. All right, so that's the first thing. So middle left for this one. So that's the first thing too. Also, my row. So here's my. This is my. Notice this is my my label copyright, and then notice how it says the image align is middle center, right? Image align is middle center. There is no image. I'm just pointing out the differences here. The size is 271 by 17. Here, the size is 35 by 13, right? For this thing, right? So how is it that that is the way it is? Well, let's take a look at company name. Company name locked is false. My image size is 0 by 7. Minimum size 0.17. Margin 6030, right? Again, what I want to do is this same stuff. So let's say I put this same margin. So let's say 6030. So it's going to be aligned with this one, right? And my size, can I change my size manually? So let's say, for example, I want to make this just like this one. So company size says 271. I want to make this one 271. So can I do that? And if I say something like 271, it's going to back to what it was, right? So remember what we want. We don't want auto size. Auto size true is not what we want. We're going to change this to auto size false, which is going to give me the ability for me to take this label and expand it to where I want it. So it's going to look closer to what it was before. Okay? And now I can change it so that it says what I want to say. So this is the author label. Notice that they did it in the other way around. They said label author, right? I like the first thing is going to be what your modifier is and then the control type. At the bottom, I'm going to change this from label 1 to author, right? That's you. That should be your author name, should go there, right? So version, copyright, company name, author. And now that we've modified this form, I want to make it so that when I load this form up, the author name goes in there. So that's what your author is. You can also put in a student ID and so on if you want to. And if I recommend you put your information in here for your assignment. Okay, so let's modify this now on the control side. So right click and view code F7. And now we've done this .label copyright.text, list.company name, and then the box description. Well, let's do the thing. Doesn't matter the order. Let's put this at the bottom. We'll say this dot, and we're going to say that the author name, author label.text, and we'll just put a hard-coded value, which is me, right? And you can put your name in there. All right, so once we have this, and if I press start, then if I go here and if I press help about, you can see that, hey, there's my author name, and that's where it comes up. It just replaces that author label with me, right? If I really want to put additional information, like that doesn't look quite right, then I could say author and then me. Okay, just to make sure that that looks okay. So again, file about, right? So this is me, and then I can put in my student ID or whatever I want in here. Okay, that is your about box. Okay, I have another minute, and I want to talk about a couple of other things before we stop for the day, because there's lots of stuff to discuss, and I never have a chance to do everything I want to do with you. So let's talk about the in my contact, my DB view form, I want to add in icons to help me out here. So there's another type of component that I can add in from menus and toolbars. There's something called a tool strip. If I drag and drop my tool strip underneath my label, underneath my my file menu, here's my file menu. Notice that it doesn't come with anything by default, but you can add things like a button, a label, a split, whatever I want, right? Almost like little icons is what I want. Combo boxes. You can put whatever you want in here, which is really a lot of control, right? I can do that by hand, or I can press the little smart arrow and I can say insert standard items. And if I did this, I get a list of little standard items that I can use. I definitely want this open icon, right? And I want the help icon. So let's just get rid of this one. I don't want to make a new document. I don't want the save or the printer or the cut or paste or anything else. But I do, and I don't need this extra separator. I do want this one, and these correlate or correspond to these two items up here. Okay, so so this is your open, and this is going to be your help. So what do I want to do is I want to connect my open, this one, to the same event as my file open. So I want to go into, when I click on it, I want to choose the open, the file save. Actually, let's undo those changes for a second. Can I get those back? I can. I did the wrong one. I want to save. So let's get rid of the open. I want save, because file save is what I can do here. And I can't do this, or this, or this, or this. So I want to save, or I want to get my info. So save does that. So what I'm going to say is when I click on the save button, then I want to go here and click on the save. When I click onto it, I want to save tool strip menu item. I want to bring that save button, save dialog up when I click the save button. I'm using the same event handler. I'm just pointing to the same thing by selecting it here instead of double clicking. If I double click and make my own, if I select, I choose the one that's already in existence. And then the same thing goes with my little info. When I click onto it, I want to open up the about tool strip menu item icon. It's exactly the same thing, and it'll do the same thing. Let's try this out and see how that works, and then we'll stop for the day. So notice I click save, and then you can see that the save button comes up. So I don't have to swim through the menu, right? It saves me that that thing. And then help. If I click this button, it brings up the info for my help, so I don't have to go help and then whatever. So that's how the buttons work. They're actually quite intuitive, and I think it's pretty good, pretty sweet the way it can work to make a user interface for yourself, right? Sorry, just dropped something there. So any questions before we end for the day? Because that's really what I wanted to cover. I wanted to cover how to fill in information from a file when you open. Again, if I was going to make a little menu here, it'd be the same thing for the other thing, which I didn't have a chance to do. As I'm talking, I'll do it. But any other questions that I have for you guys before about the stuff we covered today? That's what I want to look at. So if there's no questions, it's the same kind of idea, right? One thing, notice that my design needs to change a little bit. If I'm going to use a tool strip, you may want to move things down again for this thing, just to make sure that things are aligned with the tool strip. And again, just like for the other thing, I just want to add in my standard items, and this time I just won't have my save or my anything else. It'll just be my open. I won't even have my info. So just like I did before, I'm going to go to the icon here for click and select the open tool strip menu item. And now we're going to have that functionality really quickly with a nice little button. You can actually select your own buttons, make your own, create your own icons if you're so inclined. You can do everything. There's lots of tutorials online on how to do that, but that's pretty cool, right, in terms of putting together some really quick hit icons. All right, so if there's no other questions on this, I'm going to stop recording for the day. But before I do that, I'm going to put this up on GitHub. So I'm going to say Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Changes, right? So Changes, and then I'm going to say Added Tool Strips and About Box. Okay, commit all, Home, sync, and push, and that does everything we need. So we'll meet back on Wednesday, guys. When we meet on Wednesday, it'll be the last lecture, and I'm going to be talking about test-driven development on Wednesday. So please make sure you attend. It should be everything you need, for your assignment by then. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. For the people who have questions about the assignments or anything else, stick around and I'll answer your questions.